All right, here we go. Brand new Stick to Hockey Live. It is episode 81. Didn't do one for a while. Did one the other day with Anthony Sanfilippo. But back in the big chair today is the man from the fourthperiod.com coming to us from beautiful Montreal. It is Anthony DeMarco. Quite the day, Ant.
Yeah, I mean, around the NHL, obviously a lot of the heavy lifting was done in the past few days. Jake Gensel, Noah Hannafin, Sean Walker all got moved before the actual deadline, but we get a whopper of a trade of Thomas Hertl going to the Vegas Golden Knights as the Golden Knights just keep finding ways to manipulate the cap and load up for a playoff run.
It's amazing. They're one of the teams that obviously sticks out in a big way by everything that took place, and they get Hurdle, and I mean they're loaded for bear once again, and they're going to be about a full team over the salary cap when the playoffs begin. I don't know what the league can do about this, but they're going to have to do something at some point. This is getting a little out of control.
Yeah, like no fault to Vegas. They have the rules, and you don't hate the players, you hate the game. But they've been doing this for quite some time now. Obviously, the Tampa Bay Lightning did it, I believe it was 2021 when they won the Stanley Cup the second time.
18, yeah, 18
Yeah,
over.
that they were what, like I remember like Kucherov made a shirt about it or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it was it's something that you really can't dunk on Vegas for. It's just that they're using the rules to their advantage. Obviously, they have an owner who doesn't care about spending actual real dollars, and they just want to put the pedal to the metal and really, really try and win.
Yeah, they really are. They're loading up once again, and we'll see if they can get it over the finish line. Let's start in Philadelphia. I thought one of the other big winners, Florida, I thought did a real nice job too. Carolina, I thought came up big and really changed their teams. But let's talk about the Flyers first and foremost. Um, Not a ton of action today. A couple of ads, couple of deals. Wade Allison's gone. Garyanov comes in, and obviously they had Eric Johnson for a fourth round pick, some D depth, and I mean when you lose. I mean, basically, they lost 2/3 of their blue line right now. It's what they trotted out there in Florida last night. Um, are you surprised they didn't do more? Did you think they were going to do more? And what were you hearing and maybe didn't go through?
I mean, aside from a Scott Lawton trade, I it's exactly what I expected them to do. They added depth forward, they added depth defenseman. Like you said, like they've effectively lost their entire right side due to injury and trade with Walker, Risto, and Drysdale. So you needed a right shot defenseman. He comes in. I would imagine Adam Ginning goes down by the end of the weekend, although he had a really good game last night. Johnson could give you some stability while you wait for hopefully Risto to come back or Sealer to come back. Who knows about with Drysdale? And, you know, even if everyone's healthy, he could bump a Zamula out of the lineup. He could bump a Stahl out of the lineup. I hope Adder gets a look because he was very impressive last night. But they certainly needed a right shot guy. And if Risto's out longer term and Drysdale is out longer term, it was better to have an Eric Johnson in there to kind of like bridge the gap than just ride with six healthy defensemen. And then if one thing goes wrong or a guy starts slumping, then you're really screwed.
Yeah, I mean, then you're dipping down into the Phantoms for Belpedio or Emil Andre, and kind of looking in that vein. We've seen both of those guys actually play for the Flyers this year. They've dressed 13 defensemen. Eric Johnson will make it 14 on the season. You know, people are kind of freaking out, Ant, because they add a guy like Eric Johnson. His best days are behind him. I think was he the number one pick in the '06 draft? Is that?
Yeah, the year after
Jeez.
Sid.
Yeah, I mean, geez, that's so long ago. And he's been around a very long time. Won a cup, obviously, in St. Louis, and he's a number one overall pick. But a lot of people look at him as the number one overall pick. Number one didn't live up to the expectation. But the guy has played 970 games at this point. But giving up a fourth round pick, I mean, the probability of a fourth round pick playing 200 NHL games, I think it's about .08. So you're really not giving up much here, but a lot of people are freaking out about this.
I think they're freaking out about just the idea that he's going to block a kid. Maybe Ginning goes down, maybe Adder goes down. Who knows? The draft pick thing, I think people tend to overvalue. And you got a fifth round pick in the third party retention deal that sent Hannafin to Vegas. So you
Yeah.
kind of like make up for it in that regard. Like you essentially traded that asset out to get Eric Johnson. Like you
Hmm.
traded cap space for Eric Johnson in a lot of ways. Obviously, one's a fifth, one's a fourth. It's not apples to apples, but that's the way I look at it. And you know what? Like having, even if he just sits in this as the seventh guy or he replaces a Mark Stahl, like there's nothing wrong with that. And it sends the message to the team like, yes, we traded a big piece in Sean Walker. yes, we're dealing with injuries, but we're at least going to try and give you guys a chance to win. We're going to
Yeah.
show that we're not completely punting on this season after all the hard work. And they did give up a first. They didn't even get up a second. They didn't give up a promising prospect. It's fourth round pick.
Yeah.
Yes, you should always have as many assets as you can when you're quote unquote rebuilding. But in my opinion, it's something that's very low risk and not just incredibly high reward, but something that I believe that will pay a lot of dividends.
Yeah, and the thing is, this is the other, adding to this group, we're not looking for major ads, and we're going to talk about goalie in a second, but this group making the playoffs, if you could trade a first round pick for the guarantee they get into the playoffs and only play a round against Carolina, I think that is worth it. So Tyson Forster, Cam York, uh, Noah Cates, other young players, Sam Ersson, most of all probably, get the experience of playing in the playoffs. I think that's a really important thing when this team has positioned themselves where they are.
Yeah, and like, look, I'll give you an example. Back in 2016, they made that historic. That's probably an overstretch. That's probably stretching it, but they made that very fun run. Let's say in the first year of Hackstall, where Mason was killing it. You had the debut. It was the rookie season of Shane Gostisbehere, and they
Yeah.
get into the playoffs, and then they got stomped by the Caps. Most of that roster were just aging veterans. You didn't
Yeah.
really have any promising players aside from Shane Gostisbehere on that roster. That was pre-Konechny, pre-Sanheim, pre-Provorov. I don't even think Lawton was on the team. I think he started and went back down to the A and was replaced by Nick Cousins. That's a team that playoff experience meant nothing. This is a team where you have Ersson, you have Forster, you have Frost, you have maybe Brink, Cates, Cam York, Ronnie Attard if he sticks. There's a lot to be gained here for the future of this team. It's very important to get accustomed to winning because losing affects a room. I believe Danny Briere mentioned it in his press availability before. You could get all the assets and pieces you want, but if you don't change that culture, a lot won't change as well. And I think that's a big message the Flyers sent today in their moves is that, yes, they're about garnering assets, but they also want to keep this culture. And bring in a vet like Erik Johnson, who's won a Stanley Cup. You go out and you get Gurianov, who probably has a higher upside than a Wade Allison. And Wade Allison obviously had fallen out of favor with the Flyers. Danny Briere said as much a couple minutes ago. And I think it shows the Flyers like, yes, we had to make some tough decisions, specifically on Sean Walker, but we're not throwing in the towel here. We believe in you guys. So they're really kind of hedging. I could see the argument where like you rather just them be like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, like, and that's pissing you off. Like you can't be half pregnant. But for the Flyers, I truly believe that they're trying to straddle that fence and balance culture with garnering enough assets for the future.
Yeah, and showing that they're a franchise that if the players earn the position that they're in right now, and they've earned it, and they went out and earned it last night too. It's a resounding example of it, and the GM just kind of turns his back on them. That's a culture problem too. And you're right; they had to make a hard decision on Sean Walker. Are you surprised they didn't dip into the goalie market at all? I don't know that there was, valuable upgrades available for the price range they wanted to pay. I mean, you see Jake Allen ends up with the Devils, ho hum. But overall, I don't know what they could have done. I know Sandstrom was good in his last game, but that's still a big question mark.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a question mark. They for sure discussed it. I heard some names tossed around like Eric Comrie, Nedeljkovic, Chris Driedger, maybe Ranta on waivers. But I think for them, they were saying, look, Felix, despite one game, played really, really well, and they need 4 or 5 games here.
Yeah.
And they certainly weaponized their cap space here. And if you would have brought in one of these guys, chances are it would have eaten up a lot of your cap space. And maybe you can't bring in an Erik Johnson. Maybe you can't bring in, Gurianov is maybe like 800K, but maybe you can't use that retention, be the third-party broker in the Hanifin deal. So they're electing to go with Sandstrom to play 4 or 5 games here. It's not a lot. I understand not wanting to give up the asset. There is an inherent risk with it, given Sandstrom's history. But when he was up here last year, a lot of nights he was playing on the back end of back-to-backs, and it was a very toxic room. It wasn't a good season culturally. Obviously, they didn't play well. It's a different chance here for Sandstrom. And it's a one last shot for him to kind of stay in North America. Like, he's probably playing for his career in North America. I believe he's a pending UFA. So I'm happy they're giving Sandstrom a shot. Like, Do I think Ranta or Nedeljkovic or any of the names we just brought up would have been exponentially better? I honestly don't think so. And I've always rooted for Felix Sandstrom. I think an Urson Sandstrom tandem has at least some potential, like probably on the lower end. And maybe I'm stretching it here, but they're two homegrown guys. I think they're countrymen, right? Both from Sweden. It could work. This could work. And I'm sure for Felix, he's very pumped that he's going to get a chance here to run with the backup job.
Yeah, and he basically sat down with the Phantoms all season long. Didn't have great numbers down there. I know people got caught up in Ranta and seeing him on waivers, and a lot of people said, "Oh, they should absolutely get into." I think sometimes we get caught up in the guy's name and what he was, but not necessarily what he is. He had like an 80 save percentage on a really good Carolina team. So the shine on his game is a little lost at this point. I probably would not have gotten him. Somebody said you should claim him and go with a 3-goalie system. 3-goalie system never works. One guy's always standing around, and the other 2 guys feel weird about it. It doesn't work. There's only 2 nets in practice. When you look at Scott Laughton, you mentioned him earlier. To me, any deal with Laughton, that would have kind of been, yeah, you guys worked your bag off to get us in this position, and that would have been a real pull out of the rug, in my opinion. Plus, I think a deal for Laughton is more an off-season type deal because there is contract still beyond this year. Was there a lot of interest in Laughton? Did teams circle back on Laughton? What was the market?
I think teams certainly circled back as centermen started to come off the market and forwards and Gensel and Henrique and Wenberg and all that. I just think the Flyers, and I think Dan Briere mentioned this in his media availability, they overvalued Laughton because of his intangibles and what he brings to that room. So for them, trading Scott Laughton for a second-round pick or a collection of picks wasn't worth it. And I get it. I mean, from a tangible on-ice point of view, you could see why moving on from Laughton makes sense, especially with Ryan Poehling re-signed, with Sean Couturier back. There is a bit of a redundancy with the Flyers centerman, with the exception of Morgan Frost. So I certainly get that, but this is a team that has done a lot of work rebuilding their culture over the last 15 months or so since John Tortorella got here. And for me, I understand why they really value Scott Laughton or even overvalue Scott Laughton, that they weren't going to trade him for market value. I completely understand why Danny Briere and Keith Jones feel that way, because what kind of hit would that have taken on your room? And look, you've just established a leadership core. Laughton's the only guy that has worn a letter consistently since the beginning of last season, up until a few weeks ago when they gave the C to Couturier and another A to Konechny. I get it. Now, personally, from an on-ice point of view, I think that they should probably move on from Laughton eventually because of Ryan Poehling and because of Sean Couturier. There is a redundancy there. But in the here and now, I understand why you weren't going to move off of him for anything less than a first-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, the value equation, like we'd like to put values on guys, and value is determined by 2 things, in my opinion. The value he has where he is, which here, and that does go beyond just on the ice and culturally. And then the other part of the value equation is how much another team values that player. And you have to balance those 2 to figure out what to do. And I agree with you. I think that, there is a redundancy there with the extension of Ryan Poehling. So we'll see what happens in the offseason. If they would have traded Laughton, I think that would have pushed Couturier back into a position where he's playing 19 minutes a night right now. And we'll see if he gets back to that. It's my contention that they can't get through this murderer's row that they have coming up tomorrow night and after the San Jose game if Sean Couturier is playing 12 minutes.
Yeah. Well, look, they certainly don't have center. Well, I don't know if it's fair to say that they don't have center depth or they're just not top heavy at center. Yeah. Because you can make the argument that they don't have a single top 6 center in their lineup. Obviously, Morgan Frost hedges on that from time to time. Consistency is his issue. But I mean, with the exception of him right now, they don't have a guy that could be a top 6 center on any given night. Obviously, Couturier has had a tough time working his way back. Poehling has always been a bottom 6 guy. Ditto for Scott Laughton. So they've just been doing this by committee. They've been trying to spread the wealth here and share the load. It feels like every center at one point or another this season has gotten a look as the quote unquote 1C or the de facto 1C. But you take Scott Laughton out of that, presumably you're shifting, Noah Cates back to the middle. He wasn't as effective down the middle as he was last season, specifically defensively. His offense still is a work in progress. So I understand it. And you would have really cut the legs out from under this team up front. Now, do you care that much, or do you value the draft pick? Like, who knows? I personally wouldn't have moved him for a second round pick or a collection of picks. I think if a first was eventually on the table, which it wasn't, that's something that you couldn't have said no to. But honestly, like, I get it from their perspective. You finally got the room right. You finally have this team playing better fundamental hockey that they have than they have in years. But now I think that you're trying to really balance the asset thing with the culture thing, and they elected to lean on the side with culture when it came to Lawton.
One of the things, that the Flyers, kind of probably looked at in this deadline, obviously they, took calls on Sealer. They extend him. When you look at kind of what Danny did in total and some of the weaponization of the cap to help out, as a third-party broker and grab more value and assets that way. You look at the Walker deal. It was crazy, Ant, because I'm seeing players get traded, the Tanev deal, and I'm going, number one, a first-round pick is out of the question at this point because the market seemed to be setting that it was. But being able to weaponize that because of Ryan Johansson a little bit, they get the first-round pick. How do you look at kind of in total what Danny Briere did in his first trade deadline, the lead up and all the way up until today?
Whether or not you agree with Danny Briere's moves or the overall vision and approach that they took, he's creative. Danny Briere and front office are very, very creative, and he really set the bar for that with his first ever move with Ivan Provorov, with the retention and all that, the three-way deal with Vegas. You see him broker the deal with Hanifin to Vegas, weaponizing that cap space. They effectively weaponized their cap space again by taking on Ryan Johansson. They were willing to retain 50% on him to try and just dump him for free. Like, they were really just being creative, and were also prepared to move Ryan Ellis over to LTIR. Like, people forget that Ellis's $6.25 million has been on the cap all season long. They haven't even used up any of the LTIR space when it comes to Ryan Ellis, which they were prepared to do. So that's the way I look at it. Like, could some moves have been better? Like, obviously, there's the debate of, should you have traded Nick Sealer for whatever the offer was, a second or a third? Would it have been better to like give him the contract that he eventually did? Like, I think that was a pretty good contract in the end. It was market value. But the one thing, no matter what side of the fence you're on, that you cannot deny is that this front office is very creative. And that was something that Chuck Fletcher was not. That if Chuck Fletcher wanted a player, he just went out and outbid the other guy, like he did with Ristolainen, arguably what he did for Justin Braun back in 2019. He wanted to get rid of Shane Gostisbehere, and he just dumped him in full and paid a premium to do that. I believe it was a second, fifth or something. Briere has shown that he's creative, and I think that's something this front office has lacked for a long time, even going back to Hextall and Holmgren.
And a lot of the deals since he's taken over, I mean, look at the Provorov deal that seemingly is like a drip of a faucet that keeps yielding even more water. They've been complicated deals. Like, they're not chalk. Yeah, the Erik Johnson is fourth-round pick player, but there's a lot of moving parts to some of these deals. He's showing a real ability to know the dynamics of being a GM in the NHL, and that's managing the cap and how all those puzzle pieces fit together. So I think it's been really interesting. The thing with Chuck Fletcher too, I think, Ann, is he was a really smart guy, and sometimes too much information can kind of tie your hands. It's a little overboard, and you can't make a decision. Danny Briere has certainly made a decision. And, one of the things with the decisions that he talked about yesterday in his availability was the conversations with Sean Walker and the, kind of making that decision to trade him or not. Do you think that they were ever really going to extend him if they didn't get a first, or would they have taken some other kind of package, maybe a decent prospect in a third, or a B-level prospect in a second? Was he kind of out the door pretty in your mind no matter what? Because there was a lot of differing reports.
I think a second and a prospect is something that for sure would have been, I guess, appealing to them. Like, a lot of chatter about like a second and Philip Broberg, who I think the Flyers have liked for quite some time. But in terms of the contract, like, look, I tried to keep tabs on this right to the end. I know the Flyers wanted to extend him, but they had no appetite for what Sean Walker and his camp were looking for. The 5
4
years
years
was
was
like,
4 and 5 years too much.
yeah, like I think the Flyers were willing to go 4x4, maybe get the AAV closer to 4.5. But I think Walker and his side really dug their heels in on 5 years. And good for him. He'll probably get that on the open market.
Yeah,
And it's a career year. You have to cash in. I think he's gonna be 30 years old in a few months. Like, good on Sean Walker. I probably would have done the same. But 5 years was really scary for them. I think they would have even gone higher on the AAV with 3 years, because the one thing that was reiterated to me throughout this process is that they were not going to box themselves in financially when it was time to pay York and Jamie Drysdale.
Yeah.
That is where the Flyers' long-term outlook is when those two contracts, I believe York is 2025 and Drysdale is 2026, they wanted to have the funds to pay those two guys. Now, look, could you have signed Walker, moved on Risto in the summer, and I guess basically allocate Risto's money to Walker? For sure. But the one beneficial thing about Risto's contract is that it's going to expire right when I believe Drysdale's is coming up, or
Correct.
shortly thereafter, I think the year after.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, he's only 32. Walker was looking to be extended close to 35 years old. So I think that was a point of contention. And also Oliver Bonk, who I believe they feel is about 3 years away, maybe 2 years if you're erring on more the optimistic side. And if you have Walker locked up for 5 years and you have Sanheim as a right shot guy long term, I think that was also problematic. So I think for them, while they wanted Walker, and I think in an ideal world, you keep Sean Walker and you find a way to move off Risto, the term that the Walker camp was looking for was just unattainable for them. And to be honest, it's a tough decision to make, but I think they made the right one by not cratering to not cratering to his ass, but just kind of like giving him what he wants simply to keep the player around.
That's something that I think a lot of people don't think about when they look at things in the moment of when it's happening. But there's a flow chart. The GM has to be cognizant of what contracts are coming up. 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, RFAs going to UFA or getting closer, arbitration eligible, all that stuff. Like fitting these pieces together is not as simple as just looking on Cap Friendly at where they are right now. You got to see how everything fits together based on their projections of what that player is going to be, what they might get paid, what's the cap going up. There's a ton of stuff. I would not have been in favor of extending Walker. I don't think that what he's done this year is able to be duplicated, because I think it was the combination. He's played really well in a contract year, and we know that's a motivating factor for athletes, with a new team and a system that played to him perfectly. He had the perfect partner in Sealer, because he knew that every time he got up the ice to join the rush or start a rush, that Sealer would be back there. And I just don't know that he's ever going to duplicate the level of play this year. So I don't want to pay for a guy for that level and not be able to achieve it again.
Yeah, and I think it is fair to say that one thing that made this hard and tough for the Flyers to decide on was the fact that Sean Walker really wanted to stay. He really liked it here in Philadelphia. And I could tell you that they really do look at the long term of this cap structure. I'll give you an example. I asked one person a few weeks ago about Noah Hanifin, because stylistically, he would have probably made a lot of sense as Jamie Drysdale's long-term partner. And what was said to me is like, we already have Travis Sanheim locked up for another 7 years. We don't need another Travis Sanheim. Yeah. And that's no slight on Sanheim or no slight on Hanifin, but maybe they're similar in tier, not so much stylistically, but in tier. And you already have one of those guys in their late 20s locked up into their early to mid 30s in that range.
You have to stagger the ages of guys.
Exactly. And look, I imagine that Hanifin is going to get somewhere in the 7 to 8 range. Sanheim's deal is aging very well at this point in time. But that was something that really resonated with me, because I said, wow, they are really kind of staggering the ages. They only want a certain amount of money allocated to the veteran pieces. And it's clear that Sanheim's a guy who's going to be a veteran on that back end moving forward. And you didn't want to commit too much money to veterans. And that's why you look at a Nick Sealer. Like, you're going to need a Nick Sealer type in your bottom, I guess, on your bottom pair, one way or another. So why not just hang on to the guy? They got good value for him. And look, I do understand the whole asset thing. You know, you could have gotten a third, sold high on him or whatever. But is it more value to just get this guy at a good cost and someone that you know that that works, or move him for an asset that might not turn into anything and try and find that player in free agency anyway? And Nick Seeler probably could have gotten more in free agency.
Yeah, I think Danny turned it right. He said the minute you trade a Nick Seeler, you're looking for a Nick Seeler. And not like this guy's super skilled or, you know, you're not Cale Makar. But the thing about it is I think that deal will age really well, too, for Seeler because, I mean, if you get into the last year or two, you got the buyout, the cap's going up. You can move it. You can always move an asset for a team to take a contract. So when somebody else weaponizes, it's not prohibitive in any way at all. And he's a guy too that, you want to grab Dave?
Yeah.
You want to just forward him the link real quick?
Yeah, forward it. Do you have his email?
I'm not sure. I don't want you to give it out here on the podcast either. I do have.
Yeah, I will text you his.
I got it.
You got it?
Yeah, so I just sent it to him.
And you could give me a break too.
Yeah. Well, you need to get out.
Dave was a busy guy. He just finished up with NHL Network. But yeah, and I think it's also fair to say that you need that size on the back end, especially the Flyers back end. Okay, Sanheim's a bigger guy, and we've talked about this before, but he doesn't play that bigger style. York is somewhat undersized. Drysdale's undersized. Andre, if he comes up as an undersized guy, having Seeler and Risto is a big plus. And I had an NHL executive tell me this a few weeks ago, that in the current NHL, you can only afford to have one defenseman under 6 feet if you have cup aspirations. And if you look at Vegas last year, you look at Colorado the year before, like these are all teams that had one or less or no guys that were not monsters. Like look at Montreal. They made it to the cup final in 2021 because of their monsters on the back end. Sherrod, Edmondson, Petrie, Weber. Like they were towers back there. You look at the Lightning. I think their only undersized guy was really, I don't even know if they had an undersized guys on that back end. So
maybe Sergachev, maybe,
and he's still a big guy. Oh, there he is.
There's Dave, always looking dapper.
Hey, trying. What time is it? What day is it? Where are we?
It's trade deadline day, and it's over. You can crack the wine or champagne real soon, Dave. That's Dave Pagnotta, everybody, from the fourth period, and the main man over there. Dave, I just got a tweet from a guy and said, how are the Devils able to make a trade an hour after the deadline? One just came down. It's Vitek Vanacek for Kokkonen. It was in before the deadline. It just takes time to process, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as long as the initial trade is submitted into the queue before the 3:00 deadline, it can get announced clearly an hour after, up to 2 hours, even more. We've seen some trades happen that don't get announced until like 6:30 in the past and a little later. So just as long as you're in the queue by 3:00, you're good to go.
Dave, so sticking with the Devils,
go ahead.
Sorry to jump in, Jay. And before we get to the big news, I think we're all know where we're going league-wide. But what are the Devils? What's their plan here? They move on from Tyler Toffoli. They find a way to bring in a goaltender. Like, are they still thinking that they have a chance here to make the playoffs, maybe catch the Flyers? Or was Toffoli not going to sign? Did he want out? What was their thinking going into today?
Yeah, well with Toffoli, and it's like they tried to sign him. They weren't able to pull it off. Tom Fitzgerald admitted publicly that there was an issue on term. They tried to bridge that gap leading up to the deadline, and then I think around Thursday morning, they decided this isn't going to happen. So we're going to have to go out there and get our best options available to us. Look, LA was very much in the mix for this. There were a few other teams that were in the mix as well that wanted to make this happen. They had a second and a third. With salary retention, you could, I guess, kind of make an argument that maybe they could have gotten a little bit more out of this one. But again, you look at some of the moves that were made, that would suggest otherwise. Teams that were looking for high picks for some of their players ended up trading them for 4th and 5th round picks because the market obviously started to shift. So for Toffoli, it was clear to New Jersey they weren't going to be able to bridge the gap and sign him. So let's at least get some assets back and at the same time try to stay moderately competitive. They bring in Jake Allen with a year left on his contract. They wanted to move, and this is where I think it gets interesting for the summer. So in their talks with Calgary, the initial trade didn't include Vitek Vanacek. And then when there was no retention, Vanacek was put into the deal by New Jersey, and Calgary said, no, we have no interest in that guy. They now move Vanacek because he has 1 year left on his contract to San Jose for Kaapo Kähkönen. Kähkönen is a free agent at the end of the season.
Yeah.
They could now pursue that Markstrom trade in the summer. 2 years left on his deal. You have a valuable, strong backup in Jake Allen for next season. So I think that's part of the game plan. They seem to believe that they can make something happen there in the summer, be it with Markstrom or another goaltender, and Allen would be the backup.
Dave, Vegas is always insanely aggressive.
Yes.
I mean, they have one of their first round draft picks still with the organization. They ship everybody out. And they're all about winning. And boy, they were insanely aggressive again. They're going to be way over the cap. But are they the big winner from deadline? Is it Vegas? Is it Winnipeg, Florida, Carolina? Where's the big winner?
I like what Colorado did too.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, bringing in intangible pieces. You don't have to get the big sexy name. It's those extra pieces, those guys with grit, those balls to the wall kind of players that you bring in come playoff time. I really like what Colorado has done. And, I mean, how can you not like the fact that you bring in Tomas Hertl, Noah Hannafin, and Anthony Mantha to a team that I think right now is looking at around May in terms of when Mark Stone could be coming back. Now there is salary retention on a little over $1 million on Hertl's deal, and he's got 6 more years on his contract. So it's not as big of a hit. They have some free agents as well going into the summer. So this kind of supplements some of that potential loss for them. And the thing with Vegas, they don't have a problem clearly giving away picks and prospects as long as they're bringing back players that are going to be there long term.
Yeah.
And it's clear that obviously Hertl is going to be there for the next 6 seasons after this one. They're going to try to get Hannafin signed. I thought there was a deal there, but it looks like that's going to take a little bit more time. So if they move out all their people or picks or prospects, they're fine with the people that they've kept long term. I think it's some shrewd move by Kelly McCrimmon. We started to hear a couple days ago that they were in on something else. And then this morning I was told that there's something big in the hopper. I did not guess Tomas Hertl by any stretch, but that's a nice piece of business there by Kelly McCrimmon.
So we just talked about Vegas. You said you really liked what Colorado did. Vancouver got the party started earlier on. Edmonton made some moves. I think Winnipeg had a very under the radar good deadline.
Yep.
The Stars bring in Tanev. Do you think the playing field has shifted at all in the West as it kind of became an arms race leading into the deadline and ultimately culminated with one today?
Look, everyone in the Central beefed up. And with the additions of Monahan and Toffoli on Winnipeg, Tanev on the back end, and Dallas is like, they made one trade to bring in Chris Tanev to shore up that decor. And I love that move. I love that ad for them. But their other moves are basically their kids, Stankoven and Bork. Like those two guys, I mean, we've already seen what Stankoven can do, and Bork is pretty much ready to go as well. So they didn't feel that rush need to bring in somebody up front because they've got their own assets. Between that and the moves, like it's going to be that first round matchup.
Oh,
whoever it's going to be.
Yeah.
Get your popcorn ready because that's going to be one hell of a first round series. And honestly, assuming the first seed team gets through the first round, second round is going to be a friggin' battle too. So I'm liking all three of those teams moving forward. I think Vegas has shifted themselves more so in terms of playoff. I mean, you add Hertl, he'll be back before the end of the season. But you add him to the mix. I think it's more, play a few games before the season ends so that you get your legs under you and get back going for the playoff time. But I mean, I don't know how you count this team out, even if they end up in a wild card seed. I just don't see how you count this team out. They may even have enough to play Edmonton in the first round, and that'll be a hell of a battle, and drop LA down to a wild card seed. But the West is looking really, really good.
it's insane what could take place in the West when you know Dallas could end up getting Vegas, and Vancouver can get Nashville, or maybe the Kings drop down into that spot, and then Edmonton is just a total wild card here in the West as well. I think there's like 6 teams in the West that can legitimately win the Cup. it's pretty bananas.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
I agree. I think any of the 3 teams in the Central, the top 3 teams in the Central, can win the Cup. And on paper, looking at, I don't know about, I wouldn't say LA, but you know, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Vegas. I mean, any of those could seemingly. I'm still not fully sold on Vancouver and Edmonton. Just yet. I think Vancouver's almost there. I think they're missing a little bit of finesse up front, and Edmonton, I'm just not a big fan of that decor overall. So I think they can do damage. But I mean, look, a couple things go right, and Connor McDavid goes off for 10 points in 2 games, or 1 game even, and you never know.
So I want to look at one team in the Metropolitan Division who were the sellers probably for the first time in 10 years, Pittsburgh Penguins. They move on from Jake Gensel. Who knows where it's heading beyond this season? What's your read about where Kyle Dubas is going to take this team, and how has it been received by the leadership core, and more specifically Sidney Crosby?
Yeah, I mean, not great. They knew it was coming, but obviously they're pissed. They're not too happy about it. To lose a guy like Gensel, sure, you get Michael Bunting back, and look, I kind of like that ad. I'm not gonna lie. Like, he held his own when he was playing in Toronto's top line, so he can play with the big boys. I don't think Carolina was a good fit for him, but you know, he's a park yourself by the net kind of guy, and I don't hate that move. I don't hate that ad for Pittsburgh. I think overall people were expecting a bigger return for Jake Gensel. But I mean, like, Koivunen, they're really high on. A lot of people really like that kid and what he brings to the table. I think that some people are a little more disappointed that they didn't do more. I think a lot of people were expecting, you know, Riley Smith to go and Lars Eller to go. And maybe if you can make money work, Rickard Rakell. Teams were asking about Marcus Pettersson. Obviously, their goaltenders, Nedeljkovic being one. So I think some people were a little more disappointed that they didn't do more. Now, the guys in the room aren't. And we're going to see, maybe this lights a fire under their butts and they keep going here and make traction. I don't think so. But it wasn't the big teardown that we were kind of led to believe might happen in Pittsburgh.
I don't know that you will ever see that complete teardown until 87 hangs it up.
Yeah, agreed. And
hands are tied.
I think there's going to be some news about another deal for him this summer.
An extension?
Yeah. Wow. I know they've talked about it. I know everybody loves to go nuts on social media about trade Sid and this, that, and the other, and he was considering it and he wasn't. I think I wouldn't be surprised to see a multi-year extension there July 1.
He doesn't look like he's slowing down at all, though, either. It's the other guys that have. Bunting's going, I'll play with Sid. How many times has Pittsburgh stuck a guy around the net front and Sid got him paid? Yeah. There's a lot of those guys around the league.
Exactly. That's like, you know, back in the day, doing the same thing.
Yep.
You know, so getting your Rob Brown and Kevin Stevens and all them, like, they can hold their own, but their numbers were padded because of the big boys. And I think Bunting, his numbers were a little bit in Toronto. I think he could definitely do the same thing with Sid.
Last thing for you, Dave, the East looks intriguing as well. Flyers beat Florida last night 2-1. Of all things, a Garnet Hathaway last-minute goal. But when you look at the East and you look at Florida, you look at that Atlantic Division, Boston, that appeared they maybe had a deal for Allmark that didn't happen. You look at Toronto. It's going to be an arms race to get out of the East once again. Carolina loaded up once again. The Rangers, they did a little bit of business today as well. How do you handicap the East?
I mean, I still put Florida right at the top. I like
for the playoffs.
Yeah, like I mean, you add a happy Vladdy Tarasenko. Like, he's happy. He's excited to be there. He's got a summer home in Fort Lauderdale. His wife and kids love it there. He loves it there. You're getting a motivated and rejuvenated, I think, even though we put up decent numbers in Ottawa, Vladdy Tarasenko in Florida. And then you get Kyle Okposo, who has a chance to actually do some damage in the playoffs.
Yeah.
He hasn't seen the playoffs since I couldn't even tell you.
8 years in Buffalo.
Yeah. It wasn't happening then. So, like, this is you get a player who now brings a little bit of jam to your lineup that stabilizes presumably your fourth line based on how the rest of the lines look. I put Florida back right at the top. I like even before these moves, I thought they were even a better team than they performed last season. So I put them square at the top. Boston, Toronto will be interesting. Some cosmetic moves for both of them. We'll see what happens here. You know, obviously in that first round matchup, because it's looking like it'll end up being, you know, that. Although I like the Connor the Dewar ad for them and excuse me, for the Leafs. And so that'll be interesting. I mean, I still think it's Florida's division. So whoever comes out of that, they're gonna have a nice test in the second round. And yeah, look, Rangers, Carolina, again, Philly, cosmetic changes, moving some pieces out, bringing some pieces in. I still think it, like, the West is just jacked unless Florida, like, I think it's Florida's conference now, without question.
Yeah, Bobrovsky it is as good as he can be.
Yep.
You know, you kind of have the haves and have-nots when it comes to goaltending in the East, and you look at, you know, obviously Boston's gotten it from Swayman in particular of late, and then you look at, does Toronto have it? I don't know. You know, there's a lot of questions. What the Rangers, Shesterkin can just absolutely steal a series. If the Islanders get Sorokin, so it'll be fascinating. What's Vasilevsky? Where does he fit into the equation as well? So we'll see how it plays out. Dave, thanks for jumping on, man. I appreciate it. You do great work at the Fourth Period, fourthperiod.com.
Thank you.
Ant, great work. We'll wrap it up there. That's episode 81 of Stick to Hockey Live. Everybody enjoy your hockey this weekend. We'll talk to you next time.